Okay, for the second episode of our podcast, we have a graduate student from Boston University who is only comfortable with that piece of information being made public. So, thank you and welcome.
Hi, Kayla. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again so much for talking with me today. As you know, we are kind of going over the topic of political bias in the classroom, specifically with professors. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about your experiences. I know we've talked about it before this, but your experiences with political bias from your professors.
So I've been at BU for about a year now in the psychology master's program. And since being here, there have been a number of comments made by professors that have pretty overt political preferences. Most recently, there was a professor who sent out an email in preparation for an assignment we were going to have. And at the end of the email, she included that, so this assignment was the debate, and she included that we did not need to believe the quote unquote right wing issue or the right wing opinion of an issue, but rather we just needed to pretend to in order to have a successful debate. And then at the end of the email, she also wrote that the textbook that she had previously assigned prior to my joining the class, that students had been upset about having to read right-wing positions. And so she sympathized with that. And so she changed the textbook. Additionally, that same professor also recently had some pretty strong opinions about liberal policy and asserted that liberal policies were good policies with regards to child health, and that we're quote unquote good and liberal and care about children. And this was something that she said on Zoom in class to all the students.
That's kind of disturbing to hear. So specifically with the email with regarding the textbook choice, was it specifically the content or the author of the textbook that she had a problem with?
I believe it was the content.
Okay, and it's weird that she emailed you about this when it really, like, it wouldn't have been public knowledge to your class. Like, it really wouldn't have mattered because her changing the textbook because of a right-wing position really had no bearing on your, I guess, class. Like, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Exactly. Yeah. There was no way for any of us to know that that the textbook we were currently reading wasn't the one that had been assigned in previous years, that there was any kind of overt political bent. I hadn't detected that in this textbook. And so I'm curious what was in the other textbook that made the students decide they didn't want to read it because it was right wing. And I'm curious if it was even something that conservatives would say is right wing, or if it just wasn't overtly liberal policies that were being promoted. So yeah, it was information that she volunteered, and it set up a certain dichotomy of we're on the right side because we're liberal, and the other side is incorrect. So it was very presumptive that the students would be happy to hear that because we must agree with her opinions.
Right. So, okay, so you're a graduate psychology student. So you're dealing a lot in the factual, scientific realm of academia. So it's interesting how you have these political opinions still infiltrating your classes, even though you would assume them to almost be irrelevant in a factually based course.
Right. Yeah, even in a class like this one, which was policy related, politics do come up, but it should be empirically based. Like ultimately, we're trying to evaluate policies and see what is most beneficial and be able to look at the merits of policies and what might be unintended effects. So absolutely, it's supposed to be empirically based, not tribal in the way that politics often is. But I think that I've noticed this year that increasingly that is that is very difficult to find in a class, and it seems to be pervasive with professors varying in the amount of information that they share about their own political opinions, but it's often pretty clear that I think every professor who I've ever heard allude to politics has alluded to it from a democratic or from a left-wing point of view.
Right.
And
So most of the
unfortunately, I was just going to say, unfortunately, I think it compromises our ability to be objective as psychology
oh,
students.
yeah, for sure. And that's sad because in such a, I guess if you become a therapist from this, or anybody who kind of pursues that um, highly emotional and intimate kind of field work, that you would almost want to be trained to be objective in these situations and not allow your personal feelings to affect your medically based decisions. But um, so I guess kind of to pivot a little bit, but most of the people that I've talked to are undergrads, but you're in a unique position in that you're a grad student. So you can compare your experience in undergrad. You went to UConn. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the difference in experiences between your experience at UConn versus your experience at BU?
So UConn is, I would say, a more politically sleepy campus than BU. There are groups that are, invested and interested in politics, however, not to the degree that students are at BU. I think most students go to UConn and politics is really not at the forefront of their mind, or advocacy is not at the forefront of their mind. They're interested in partying, they're interested in studying, and interested in sports. Advocacy, I think, is sometimes at the way back of somebody's mind. So compare that with BU. From the year that I've been here, what's been apparent to me is it seems as though advocacy is actually at the forefront of a lot of students' minds, and something like sports, etc., comes into the back, or it's a smaller group of students that are more invested in that kind of thing. So it seems like it's more of a pastime of students here, but it's a pastime that is so emotional in nature that it doesn't just stay at the fringes, and students are encouraged to bring it into the classroom. And so I think that we've seen advocacy really infiltrate the classroom, even for social sciences. And I hear even you could say like the harder sciences like biology, which is really problematic. Additionally, I think BU really markets itself as a progressive campus. So it will attract students who have that bent. And I think students who don't even have a very strong bent might develop it while they're here.
And what about the professors? I mean, I know as a grad student, you're working much more closely with professors. So how are they, I guess, how are their political expressions different from your undergraduate experience to your graduate experience?
So in undergrad, I don't remember any of my psychology professors making political remarks in classroom. I do recall an anthropology professor of mine being very, very positive towards critical race theory, which is political, or at least politically adjacent. But not so much in psychology. Professors tended to focus more on the skills of research and how to be objective, and even how our own views of the world can really be very emotionally based, and to be aware of that in order to try to be more objective, especially when we're seeing clients or when we're dealing with other people, in order to try to be the level-headed one in a situation, which is really something that attracted me to psychology in the first place. I really like that level-headed approach to life. At BU, professors, because it's such a smaller class with master's students, we do get more time with professors. And I've found that they're not as careful about being overt politically. I think actually when they are overt, it probably gains them points in the eyes of the students. And so it's it's something that is just more normalized, and students are encouraging of it. So I think that professors would be more careful perhaps if they knew that there were students of differing opinions in their classes.
Was there ever a time or a situation where maybe even specifically with this professor that you had mentioned, who is pretty much very overtly liberal, that you expressed an opposing view or expressed a conservative view? And what, if you did, what were her reactions to that?
So there was an incident, um, that, without getting into details, there was an incident with another student for expressing a view that I wouldn't even say is conservative, but it was the idea that you as an individual are A, responsible for your actions, and that B, you're not responsible for the actions of your ancestors or for people who might be in the same racial group as you. And I was able to talk with my professor about this because I had a student lob an accusation of racism at me for making this assertion, which was the first time I'd ever been called racist. And it was very, very upsetting. So I spoke with my professor about that because I knew that there was a potential for this to get out of hand and to really backfire on me. Um, so we were able to talk about it. She tried to remain neutral and I think de-escalate the situation, which was good. She did phrase it as a philosophical difference that we had, although I don't think it's philosophy when you're saying that you're, as an individual, responsible for your actions. I don't think that philosophers really debate about that. But so to the question of, did I ever say something conservative in class that she responded to negatively? No, I tended to adjust what I said. I did have fellow students respond negatively more to what I said.
I'm surprised that I mean, I'm happily surprised that she kind of de-escalated the situation rather than kind of adding fuel to the fire. But yeah, one of the things that will always frustrate me is kind of these baseless accusations of racism or just throwing the word around like it's nothing. I have been called racist for a multitude of things that weren't at all racist. And when I asked, what about what I just said or whatever that is racist? And they said, it's not my job to teach you. I said, well, you can't just call me racist without telling me why. I take that very seriously. I mean, if you're going to call me racist, that's a huge thing to say. And I take that very seriously. But it's almost like in order to shut you down, in order to stop you, it's just lobbing these accusations against you. And it's really sad because then it really takes away from the weight of the word, the meaning of the word, that it should have a strong meaning and strong weight to anybody who uses it. But yeah, that's really frustrating. And I think that that's something a lot of conservative students are experiencing on college campuses.
Certainly. Yeah. So to
Yeah,
her credit, as a professor, she did try to de-escalate the situation.
yeah, that's nice to hear. Have you ever confronted any professors about their kind of overt political biases?
I haven't confronted professors directly. I did write to President Brown last semester following a slew of emails that I thought were extremely politically biased. So, he responded. He gave just a polite, more placating response. Um, as for things that other professors have said, no, I haven't brought it up with them. There was another professor who had also commented when after the elections were finished that he was very happy about the election results and that it would be a return to polite and intelligent civil behavior. I wouldn't bring it up with a professor. I don't think that it would go very well. I'm considering bringing it up with this professor who made the comments about liberal policy being good policy. However, I'll have to choose my wording very carefully.
And I guess what would you say is the reason behind the hesitation? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of conservative students who haven't exactly experienced direct effects on their grading, on their relationships with their professors, from expressions of political bias, but they are very hesitant to say anything. So I'm wondering, what is the basis for that hesitation?
So I haven't experienced any grade bias. Again, I also haven't been very overt with my differing opinions due to that hesitation. I think that the trepidation that conservative students feel is due to hearing about people in the news being lambasted for really seemingly innocent comments that then get skewed, or even being fired, say, for being an open Trump supporter or an open conservative. Um, Additionally, even if grades are not affected, I think that professors, potentially the relationship with your professors could be affected. And definitely as a master's student, my professional relationships are extremely important. They give me access to jobs, important recommendations to go on to a doctoral program. So it's really something that if you ruin, or if you damage a relationship with one professor, they may speak to other professors, and the department is small, so it could potentially really have a negative ripple effect and could affect your career when you're just starting it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to kind of verbalize it is to use psychology, I guess. Anybody does anybody who is kind of challenged isn't necessarily going to view that other person in a favorable light, especially if they're subordinate, you know? So I think that professors who, granted, have worked very hard to get to where they are, worked very hard to get their PhDs, if they have PhDs, and don't and feel kind of I mean, granted, I don't want to say they have big egos because that's rude, but like they have, view themselves kind of on this higher pedestal, and they don't want to be not even questioned, but proven wrong by quote unquote subordinates being their students. So I think that's where the hesitation comes from, because it's just a psychological fact, theory, however we're going to say it. It's like, well, I know that this person is going to react because they're human, and that's how humans react mostly. And you just don't want to take that chance because the repercussions could be huge. Um, I guess I would ask, do you feel that your academic performance has been affected by professors' political bias, not in a grading sense, but in your willingness to participate in class discussions, thereby not being as engaged in class discussions in a kind of like a conscious situation? um yeah, so I guess, like, do you feel that your academic performance has been affected?
Yeah, I think so, because I think that asking certain questions is going to be frowned upon. If the professors don't overtly frown upon it, then you will be called out by other students. And I do have experience with that. And you might have experience with that as well. And that is, I hate to admit it, but it's intimidating knowing that already something that you say, you're already imagining what the response is going to be. And it's not that it's coming from nowhere, it's coming from past experiences. So I think that my performance has been affected. It's compromised the ability to really delve deep into certain issues, because you can't ask certain questions, or you can, but it feels as though it's a risk, that you might be labeled a certain way simply for asking the question. So I have asked some questions, say with professors one-on-one. They don't often, one professor I'm thinking about in particular, didn't give a straight answer. He more said, well, we don't have time to get into it at that level. That's why we didn't. But the problem is then that students are walking away with opinions formed on only partial information. And they think that the information being pushed is not even something that is um, that it's actually being debated. It's something that researchers or professionals have differing points of view on. And there might be a primary point of view, but it doesn't mean that it's correct and it doesn't mean that it's ethical. So I think that professors will either steer away from these difficult conversations, which as future clinicians, we really need to be having because we have a lot of responsibility when we're seeing someone. And we have the potential to really impact the decisions that they make in their lives. And we can't do that with partial information.
For sure. I definitely can kind of empathize with that. I mean, I feel it's like if I have a certain question, I'm almost hesitant to ask it, not necessarily because of the professor's reaction, but the students, and then the professor's kind of unwillingness to step in, which I found a lot of times happening too.
Yeah,
Um,
it's quite surprising what people will assert. Sometimes something that is so clearly afactual, and the professor will not correct them.
for sure. And there's some times where I'm like, you know what, I have to speak out. Like this is really bad. And I mean, there's there have been those times where it's something really, really bad. And I'm like, I can't just sit silent about this. So I do speak up. But yeah, I totally understand that. And I've experienced that too.
May I
What?
ask you a question?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sure.
When
Let's sure.
I'm curious because it's something I've noticed with myself. When you're hearing something and you're like from another student or even from a professor, and you're already like, okay, unfortunately, I'm on the other side of this, which is not unfortunate, but it's because it's the quote unquote wrong side to be on for this particular environment. Do you have any physical sensations when you imagine like getting ready to respond?
Ooh, that's a good question. Only when it comes to Israel. It's weird.
Okay.
I've noticed this and I've thought about it too, because I have such an emotional connection to it. It my kind of physiological response to whatever kind of assertion is being made is one of my soul hurts, you know, whereas with domestic politics, yes, I'm passionate about it, and yes, I have my views formed, but it's not something that encompasses my being as much as being a Jew does, and along with being a Jew is being a Zionist, in my opinion. So because I feel that so much in my being, and because my family is affected by the things that these people are saying, and my friends are being affected, and my friends are literally, their lives are on the line because they're in the army by the things that these people are saying, then I like start shaking. I get shaky, like my hands will start shaking. Literally when I speak, it sounds like I'm about to cry because I'm so nervous to speak up. But those are the moments where I say I need to speak up. Those when I was just talking where I'm like, I just have to. Those are the moments where I really feel I just have to. And then I just kind of have to take a deep breath and calm myself. And remember, in order for me to be taken seriously, I really have to put my emotions away and purely come at it from a factual standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can definitely
So
understand that. And it's those issues that really matter to us, that it's great that you do speak out and that you say something, but that there's that anticipation of speaking out. Or then when you actually do and you find yourself, your voice is shaky, things like that. I found that when I'm getting ready to respond to something that I think I'm going to be attacked for, I actually feel my heart rate increase,
yeah, yeah.
which is wild that something like just imagining having a conversation can do that, but it
Yeah,
does.
I feel that. Yeah, I feel that too. I literally, it feels kind of like there's water in my ears. Like I can't hear as well. Like,
Mm,
and I think I've talked about this with my mom too. It's like, it literally feels like a response from my soul because my soul is hurting when I hear these things and these kind of accusations. So
mm.
it's interesting. Um, Kind of pivoting. What issues in the field of psychology spark these political debates?
Oh, this is one of those things that um, I'll share about it on the podcast. But they're very controversial. So I think there are two main issues that I see that I personally worry about for my future career. One is the issue of race when it comes to matching a therapist with a client. Um, I first heard this in undergrad actually from that same anthropology professor. And she was talking about doctors and that she was basically advocating that patients who are from a minority group should be seen by a doctor who is also from that same minority group, because a white doctor would not be able to objectively treat them and give them adequate treatment. I remember hearing this, and that was one of those moments where I had to say something. I was so shocked that she had this opinion. And I said, well, it really doesn't matter what your skin color is. It matters that you know how to do your job and that you're trained well. And if you're a good doctor, you will treat the client to the best of your ability, regardless of whether you share the same skin tone or the same life experiences. I was really flabbergasted because it's advocating, in my opinion, for segregating clients. And I think that that is wrong. So I see that issue also coming up in psychology, but it's being framed as cultural matching. So you get your client may do better with someone who comes from a similar cultural background. So you match them with someone from that same cultural background. But what I hear mostly is it's not really a cultural background, it's a racial background. The other issue is when it comes to transgender issues, that is something that you will absolutely have your career ruined over and be fired for. There are already laws passed in California and in Canada about what treatment you can provide for specifically children. We're not even talking about adults who want to undergo transitioning, but children. And I heard someone even frame it as it's considered child abuse in California. As a psychologist, if you prevent your child client from transitioning. So it raises huge ethical concerns. And I think psychologists are going to be leaving the field because you can't, if you have these concerns and you are not able to use your best judgment as an expert to treat your client without the risk of being thrown in jail or losing your license, then you're going to leave the field. So these are really big issues, unfortunately, that have to be dealt with.
Yeah, that's so crazy to me. I mean, you can't even buy a lottery ticket without being 18 years old, but somehow these children are being allowed to completely change their hormonal composition. It's really kind of crazy to me that that's allowed and or that's being advocated for. I mean, when you're 18 and you're a fully developed person, go for it. Do whatever you want to do. Do what makes your heart happy. But a child who is incapable of making I mean, when I was 3, I was walking around dressed in Little Mermaid costume, and I would go everywhere dressed as a Little Mermaid with the red wig and everything. But I was not asking my mother to take me and I don't even know, get my hair dyed red and get a prosthetic mermaid tail put on. No, because I'm a child. You have to let people grow into who they are and then make the decisions for themselves when they're adults. With regards to doctors and patients being of the same race, that scares me to no end because I just can't find a justification for it. Okay, you want to make the argument we're of the same cultural background, so they're going to understand me more. Well, you know what? Sometimes I relate to people who have maybe gone through the same life experiences that I have that are of a different race than people that of my same race. Like it's more so about your life experiences rather than the color of your skin or where your family's from that really make the difference. And we shouldn't be judging people based on the color of their skin. And I'm gonna quote Dr. Martin Luther King here because I think we're all kind of forgetting his message, but rather on the content of their character and the kind of the level of care that they can provide. That is what I'm going to judge a doctor based on, not if they're black or white or Hispanic, whatever. Like, it's ridiculous. Um, Kind of a last point ish. So people talk a lot about morality and how the other side, meaning conservatives, they're immoral. And because they're immoral, they shouldn't even be kind of entertained in a discussion. Their opinions shouldn't even be entertained, or the people themselves shouldn't be entertained or included in these discussions. And that's almost used as a justification for this. So, how would you, as somebody who obviously is very kind of involved in psychology with, and I guess morality to a certain extent, how would you kind of A, respond to that, and B, how should conservative students respond to that?
So I'm going to repeat myself for what I said the other day. I think there's certain lingo that liberals tend to use, like "you're othering me." I think that if you said that to someone, it might just quickly like stop them in their tracks because you're speaking their language. Although I think that it's a meaningless thing to say. So it's not that I'm advocating that conservatives adopt that kind of language, but the underlying idea holds true, which is that you have decided I'm not in your group. So if I'm not in your group, then I must not be like you. And obviously, we all think that our side is the right side, the moral side. So, ergo, if you're not on my side, then you must be immoral. And it's not that there's any room for gray or for discussion. I think that this approach is really, really damaging and really unrealistic. I think it also relies on shaming conservative students or guilting them into submission in a way. Not that it is successful in that, but I think that that is a potential effect. When you're accusing someone of being immoral, like that's very, very deep. And I can't think of actually any conservative student who I've ever spoken to, any conservative person who has not thought about morality deeply, either from a religious point of view, from a more secular point of view. Um, so the accusation that you could be immoral is very hurtful. And I think that students who are not conservative lob it because they're trying to shame you. And then when they do that, they don't even explain to you, like you mentioned, why what you've said is immoral, because you should already know. And if you don't know, you need to educate yourself, meaning you need to adopt my opinion in order to be moral. So when people say that, I think you have to, if you can point out to them perhaps one on one that they are acting in a very tribal way, which is probably not something that they would condone from certain other groups, but they are acting that way themselves. And they're preventing dialogue and they're preventing seeing other people as, I think, fully human and respecting their point of view, even if they disagree. So pointing that out to students, also keeping your head up high and just checking in with your own moral compass of where am I coming from with this? And do I feel that I am acting in a moral way, even if they say I'm not? If they say I'm not, okay, too bad. At the end of the day, I answer to myself, I answer to whatever higher power I believe in, and I'm going to do the best that I can.
For sure, for sure. Last question. Where do we go from here? That's kind of the question I'm asking everyone kind of as we wrap up, because I think it's important to kind of end on a note of action and a note of hope. What can professors do who are hopefully listening? What can conservative students do? And even what can liberal students do to ensure a healthy, diverse environment for students?
So I'll start with students. I think that whether you are liberal, conservative, moderate, whatever your position might be, if you don't like the tenseness that you're seeing in the country and the polarization, then you need to look at yourself and see how you might be contributing to it. It doesn't mean changing your views. It does mean perhaps changing how you go about expressing your views, how you engage in dialogue with people who disagree with you. Do you dismiss them? Or do you decide, we may have actually very similar values when you actually get down to talking to people. We have different ideas about how we live those values and what, say, policies or laws will best achieve our end goals. But I think, studies find that values from Democrat to Republican are very similar. We just have different ideas about how to go about living them. So being able to find the common ground is really, really important. Seeking out information that you might disagree with, I think can also be really humbling. Even if you still disagree with it at the end, at least you know what the other side is saying and thinking. So then you're able to engage with them and not just hear what your side is saying about them that's only negative. So just making sure that your idea of what people really are is matching with reality. And that could be extreme for some people, for sure. And I think there are a lot of other people who are more moderate who maybe have just never heard a different point of view. I know I didn't hear a different point of view until I got to college and I found that I was open to hearing different points of view. I probably heard them when I was younger, but I never even bothered to entertain the one Republican in my friend group, and nobody else did either. And I wish that I had, looking back on it. So going to what professors can do, I think professors have a lot of influence as well, and the administration has a lot of influence. I think that they should really strive to be apolitical, or when they do present their opinions, and if their opinions are of a certain political bent, then they should strive to present intellectual information from the other side as well, and try to give a holistic view of issues so that students can walk away really informed and understanding the merits of a certain side or a certain position and not just react to it emotionally. I think the administration should be as apolitical as possible, which is very, very different than what we have at BU.
For sure.
And that's, yeah. And that's where like students, I think, do have a lot of power in this issue because we can provide a tremendous amount of pressure to the administration for what we want.
100%. I think, yeah, I mean, I think the administration plays a huge role in it, and they set the tone for the rest of the campus of what is and is not allowed, literally in terms of like rules and also in terms of a cultural environment, a social environment on campus. And I think playing into this censorship, granted they're a private institution so they can really do whatever they want, but it's just not healthy for students of all different walks of life with all their different opinions and the different experiences that they bring with them from wherever they may come from. I mean, you can't live your life sheltered from different opinions. Like, yeah, do I hate like having to hear, I don't even know, white supremacist opinions? Yeah, it sucks. I don't like it. But guess what? I'm going to listen because that helps me become even more strong in my own positions of being obviously against that. But you can't be sheltered because then you're going to be in total shock when you go into the real world. Unfortunately, our real world is also being affected by this. But when you go into the real world and you are faced with this and you're just going to shut down. You can't. You have to be strong and know what you're doing. And it's really sad. But thank you so much for being on this podcast, on this episode. I really appreciate it. And you really provided really great insight from especially a psychological standpoint.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be able to talk about it. I would just want to add one thing. It's
Please.
okay to have boundaries. Like you don't have to engage with people who hate Jews or people who, if you're Black, who hate Black people, because we do all have a limit. But I think it is good to build on what you're saying, to build a certain like threshold, like a certain tolerance to that stuff, because what I hear from liberals is it seems that they put conservatives in the same group as white supremacists.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because Yeah, because they have a very low threshold for what that is. And so
Right.
anything that even remotely makes them upset, they might put in with the worst possible scenario. So,
Right. My kind of, I guess, comparison there was more so because if people are like, oh, but like, what about white supremacists? Like, shouldn't we ban those ideas? And I'm like, no, you know what? I feel free speech is all encompassing, obviously, with a very few exceptions. But because the second we start limiting free speech, more and more and more and more and more is going to be limited. So I guess
right.
I use an extreme example to make my point, but yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.